It somehow got worse than last Saturday against Houston. Kansas gives up their biggest lead in school history, and they lose by double digits in a pitiful performance in Waco against the Baylor Bears.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thank you for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to everydayers catching each and every show. We're free and available anywhere you get your podcasts, and you can find us on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. On today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we are recapping KU losing 81-70 in Waco to the Baylor Bears, a game that Kansas blew. They were up by as much as 21 points in the game. It ends up being their biggest blown lead in school history, outscored 60-30 in the second half in Waco, and it feels like things are officially, I don't know, the sky is officially falling for KU right now for this season. So we're going to get into what went wrong again for KU, what is going wrong right now, I think, big issues from this game and the post-game of this game that could have long-term reverberations for the season that make me wonder if it's just not going to get any better. Some game awards and what is next for KU on this episode that's brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase with Game Time. Kansas loses 81-70, again, outscored 60-30 in the second half. And this is a game where, again, it becomes your largest blown lead in school history. You're up by as much as 21 points at one point. You're up 19 at halftime. The lead was gone by the under 12 timeout. You gave it up so fast. Like, you think of when Kansas beat Missouri in the last time they played before they renewed everything, and Kansas was down by around that same margin. They ended up coming back. Like, they didn't get the lead till late. Like, it took Baylor so quick to be able to get the lead. And then Kansas mounted, a solid lead again. But then Baylor goes on that 17-0 run toward the end of the game. They make their final 7 field goals of the game. It was just a bad game for Kansas all the way around. Kansas shot well on 2-point shots, but they couldn't shoot well from 3. They did not shoot well at the free throw line, only 63%. Baylor, meanwhile, shoots 89% at the free throw line. Kansas had too many turnovers, and they actually did a pretty good job of forcing Baylor turnovers early. But the difference was the live ball turnovers, because Baylor led 24-11 in points off turnovers, despite the fact they had 3 more total turnovers in the game. So those are the important ones. Kansas just out-hustled and outworked on the glass. Baylor had a 40-27 rebound advantage and ended up with an 11-5 offensive rebound advantage that turned into a 14-11 advantage in second chance points. Baylor outscored Kansas in the paint, which is typically bread and butter for KU. So if you're getting outscored in an area that typically you're good at, that is going to be a recipe for disaster. You're outscored 15-4 in fast break points. Again, that's an area where Kansas is typically good in fast break scoring. You weren't in this game. And in the end, Kansas leads for over 32 minutes, but they still find a way to lose the game. I think this outdid the Houston game for me, because here's the thing. You could argue that the Houston game is maybe more excruciating because it just happened so quickly. But I think this one was more torturous because it happened over a longer period of time, where it wasn't that same level of shock necessarily, where it's just like, oh, it just all of a sudden happened and you're like, what the heck just happened? With this one, addition to that, like, you can look back at the Houston one, and obviously it was horrible the way that ended for KU, and they handled it so poorly. But you can at the very least look to it and be like, okay, it was 2 end of game sequences where they handled it really poorly, but overall, like, there were some positives to take away from that game. Flory Bidunga was awesome. Rylan Griffin was awesome. Some long-term takeaways from those players, and you played one of the most elite teams in the country toe-to-toe and should have beat them. You don't have that same, long-term positive trajectory. You can still view this from half glass full. You can't from this game. Baylor is not like a great team this year. This is not a top 20 team in the country. This is not a situation where you come away from this being like, oh, well, at least this player played good. That makes me feel better about this team in the long term. At least, Bill Self figured out this part of the rotation or this lineup that is going to, even though they lost this game, it's going to help them in the long term. None of that exists in this game, where this is the most disappointing game of the season for KU. And this feels like, to me, the sky is falling for the season. And part of that is the idea, not just how you lost the game and that you did lose the game, but like, you look at going back to like Flory Bidunga, for instance, okay? In my mind, like, I legitimately think Flory is the best player on the team. Now, if you want to argue it's Hunter Dickinson and look at the production he's putting out, like, sure, whatever. Or you want to say that, like, Zeke Mayo, when he's scoring well, like, that's fine too if you want to have those arguments, whatever. I don't think you can argue against Flory being a top 3 player on the team. And he played 4 minutes in the second half. I know box score plus minus is like probably not a great stat to look at for an individual game, but Flory was +3 in this game. Hunter Dickinson was -15. KJ Adams was -5. I mean, Zeke Mayo was -13. And again, I'm not trying to throw like those players under the bus necessarily. I'm just saying like Flory is this game-changing player. And in a game where you give up 60 points in the second half, don't you think Flory Bidunga would have helped you on the defensive end of the court in the second half of the game? You know, and I think that it's incredibly frustrating that, okay, you started Flory to start the game. You ended up 19 at half. KJ ends up playing way more minutes than Flory in the second half, and it's not all just on that one lineup decision. That one lineup decision does not lead to a 30-point swing in a game, but it certainly contributes to it. And like, it's just this usage thing where it's like, I continue to say, like, I don't blame KJ Adams. Like, KJ tries his butt off when he is out there. He has shortcomings, but it is not for an effort thing. If you want to blame somebody, I think you have to blame Bill Self for the usage of KJ Adams, right? It's not that like KJ's not going out there and just not trying. KJ is trying. The problem is Bill Self needs to be like, you know what, like my 1-year-old daughter could go out there and crawl her butt off on the court. She's going to try her hardest. It's not going to be for lack of effort. Bill Self's not going to play her because you can't dribble the basketball or shoot the basketball. So it's like at some point it's on the usage of the player and not the player necessarily. And again, going back to that usage, it's like you're looking for late buckets in the game when it's a 1-score game or it's a tie game or whatever, and you're running DeJuan KJ pick and roll, or you're running shots to KJ Adams, or it's like, what are we doing here? Like KJ has some positive things about his game, but it feels like at times Bill Self is using KJ Adams like Jalen Wilson, when KJ Adams should be used like Kevin Young. And there's a valley there of what is happening. And I think it just feels like right now this coaching staff has zero idea. Again, like I still think Bill Self is a fantastic, basketball coach, right? This season has not been a good, well-coached basketball season, right? It's like if you have like an all-star MLB hitter and they have 1 year where they just slump, right? And if you want to say 2 years, like whatever. But This is what really scares me. So this is from posting. So this is from Henry Greenstein of KUSports.com, Lawrence World. He tweeted out, Self on going with Diggy Coit and KJ Adams at the end over Flory Bidunga and Shaquille Moore. He said it was because Flory and Shaq didn't score at all. He said it was not a hard decision. And again, that scares me because I think Flory is this unworldly prospect. And like, I get it. Shaquille Moore, I don't think has scored in the last 2 games. He's played 22 minutes. Then again, you could probably also say, okay, if you give up 60 points in the second half, would Shaquille Moore help you there, especially when Rob Wright had 20 points in the second half? Could he have helped on the defensive end and take some of those assignments against Rob Wright a few possessions? Maybe. But it's the Flory one specifically where it's like, okay, yes, sure. Flory's best part of his game is that he's not like, yes, Flory is not a scorer, whatever. Is KJ Adams a scorer? I don't think he is. So it's like that quote comes off almost tone deaf to me. It comes off almost making things feel worse for me because it's like this idea that like, well, we couldn't put Flory in the game because he can't score. KJ Adams isn't scoring either. But Flory, you're getting more rebounds, and maybe Flory would have helped on the defensive end of the court in this game because nothing was working for you in the second half on the defensive end. And I can't help but think a lot of those Rob Wright shots where he's driving in and finishing at the rim, or he's driving in, he's throwing up a floater and hitting it. Is there any part in anybody else's mind where they're thinking, oh, hey, if we have this elite shot blocker named Flory Bidunga in there, that he doesn't block 1 or 2 of those, that he doesn't influence Rob Wright's next shot, that he doesn't make Rob Wright think twice about the next floater that's going to go up, thinking maybe I shouldn't shoot that because this dude's going to block it? I don't know. Just food for thought. And that quote certainly does not make me feel better that it's going to get better anytime soon. And this is just what Kansas is at this point in time. I was honestly holding out hope for this stretch of play. I was holding out hope that they would win this game, that you go down Fieldhouse on Monday night, you beat Iowa State, and it feel like you are back. But they disappointed everyone even more than already, which is wild to consider. This is just not a good Kansas team. If you're still talking like, of course, if you're a fan of Northwestern basketball, you're probably sitting there going, no, they're still a good team. I'd gladly take that season. Okay, but we judge it on a different basis. We judge this on the Kansas line, the Kansas expectations. And it's not even close to that, man. They have way too many flaws. They have way too many flaws, from roster construction to fit to lack of offense, to lack of consistency, to lack of composure, to lack of leadership. I mean, the amount of veteran players on this team and the way they play and crumble on the road and crumble and giving up some of these leads and some of these big moments is mind-blowing. And there's so much more, and it's just such an incredible disappointment right now for KU. Let's get to our game trophies. This is Locked On Jayhawks. This episode of the show is brought to you by Game Time. You can get tickets to the KU Iowa State game right now for Monday night. I mean, there might be some up there that are, people mad selling, so to speak. I mean, I'm looking right now, $116, $119, $119. That's with all-in pricing too, which is a feature you can toggle on Game Time. I can click the Game Time picks. If you want to sit in the upper corner 2, row 13, you can get those right now for $119. I mean, there's some great seats available for the KU Iowa State game, which I guess is a real opportunity to hopefully try to turn things around. Again, don't feel great about it, but you can do that with Game Time, and you can go. Maybe you need to go to a comedy event or a concert, just wash this out of your mind. You can do that with Game Time too. So download the Game Time app and create an account. Use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase with Game Time. Again, that is $20 off with Game Time. Give it a download. Again, that is Locked On College, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. And download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. I continuing on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks, and we will have a Monday episode out there to preview the KU Iowa State game. We'll have a postcast from that game coming up on Monday night as well. All right, game awards for this one for KU. Best moment of the game. I mean, the first half, there were a lot of great moments to choose from. You had another Flory Bidunga steal to dunk. Those are always fun. Seems like that's happening pretty regularly now. The back-to-back threes by David Coit were really cool to see. That he ended up just 3 of 8, 2 of 7 from 3. So it wasn't his best game, but he actually ended up team best plus 10 on the plus minus. And I thought overall in a game where, I thought he was fine. And to back up after having a really good game, I thought, so that was good to see at the beginning of the first half. Honestly, the first half in general, KU was great in the first half. You led by 19. Baylor wasn't very good. The defense was good for KU in the first half. And then in the second half, as bad as the start to the second half was, it felt like KU was going to weather the storm at one point. You get that Zeke Mayo 3, that would be another best moment here, and it puts you back in front, and then you go on a little bit of a run to get up, 8, 10 points. And that was a good stretch for KU, but working into the worst moments of the game, you have that one possession where it's like Baylor hits the 3, then DeJuan Harris gets sent to the free throw line, and he misses both free throws. And again, this is a now continued trend for DeJuan, 4 of 7 at the free throw line in this game. KU is a team 63%, where it's like, what is going on? Why do they keep having this happen? And then that's in between another made 3 for Baylor. Another worst moment, Kansas just handling the press. If you are any other team in the country, how do you not see what has happened to KU these past couple of games and go, we're going to press KU at different points of the game, right? Maybe you don't have the personnel to do it all 40 minutes of the game. I have a hard time believing that Iowa State's not going to show it for several different possessions of the game. I mean, that's a gritty team who plays tough defense, who plays hard, who plays with a physicality and an energy about them. I have a hard time believing they're not going to throw out a press at some point against Kansas on Monday night in that one. So, yeah, that continues to be an issue for KU. There was the one possession where Hunter missed the front end of the 1-and-1 again, free throw issues for KU. Then he couldn't secure the offensive rebound on the DeJuan missed floater. That was not a fun one when it was a close game. In general, the 17-0 run by Baylor toward the end of the game that put them up 9 at one point before KU answered. But by that point, it was just, put to bed. A lot of really bad moments for KU in this one. Really the whole second half. I mean, just horrendous moment. This is what's crazy too. Did you know Kansas only took 5 layups plus dunks in the game? They were 3 for 3 on layups. They were 2 for 2 on dunks. I mean, how does that happen? I don't know if those stats are wrong. Those might be wrong because it says Baylor only had 6. I don't know. Was it just game of floaters? I guess that would be our next award is the appalling stat of the game. That could certainly go up there if that ends up being the case. I think in general, Baylor outscoring you 60-30 in the second half. Like that is appalling stat of the game that you would let that have, that you would allow 60 points, that you would be outscored by 30 points. Beyond that, the points off turnovers being 24-11. We mentioned that one earlier. Kansas only shooting 63% free. I don't know. Actually, that one's not appalling because we've seen Kansas do that one before. So it certainly wouldn't be that one. Rob Wright's second half line for the game. Rob Wright ended up with, in just the second half, 20 points on 7 of 9 with 5 assists and 2 steals. Norchad Omier, also his second half. Holy cow. I did not realize what he did in the second half. So Norchad Omier in the first half had 1.5 rebounds. Norchad Omier in the second half had 17 points, 11 rebounds. Now, he was a free throw merchant, 12 of 12 on free throws there, which good for him for making all those free throws because he's been a solid free throw shooter, but certainly you wouldn't expect him to do that. But yeah, those would certainly be appalling stats of the game. And the crazy thing about this, VJ Edgecombe, who has been an unbelievable player for Baylor so far this year as a freshman. I mean, he was having a good impact on the game. He had 14 points. He had 5 rebounds, 5 of 10 from the floor. Gets injured. And even with his injury, one of the best players in the Big 12, Kansas still lost by 11 in a game they once led by 21 points. So I don't know, pick any of those for the appalling stat of the game. Okay, who would be the offensive MVP for KU in this one? I mean, statistically, it has to be Hunter Dickinson, right? 20 points, 8 of 15 shooting, 4 of 5 at the free throw line. He had 2 offensive rebounds, which is fine for offensive. You would like to see more than 5 total rebounds, but ended up fouling out in the game. So I guess he would be up there. I felt like the 20 points were inconsequential. I mean, obviously you lose by 11, so technically everything was, but I guess by default, I don't know who else I would pick, right? Shaquille Moore has 0 points. DeJuan Harris was actually, I thought, pretty good on the offensive end. I mean, obviously at the end of the game didn't, but like 12 points, 8 assists, but he also had the team worst plus minus in the game, interestingly enough. Zeke Mayo had a really rough start to this one. He at least finished a little bit stronger, 8 points in the final 12 minutes of the game. Storr had 3, Flory had 2, KJ had 6, and 4 turnovers, which is not great. Rylan Griffin looked pretty good on the offensive end. I wish we'd see him even more for the game, 23 minutes. Like, I'd love to see Rylan 30 minutes per game, honestly, at this point. 11 points, 2 of 4 from 3. David Coit had 8 points, scored some, but yeah, I guess by default, it's just Hunter Dickinson with the 20 points. What about defensive MVP for KU? Can we pick someone? They give up 60 points in the second half. So, I don't really feel like we should pick someone. And I don't even know who the answer would be because you look at it, and again, you look at the Baylor side of things, and they're getting 18 points, 16 rebounds from their 4-man Omier, who's their 4/5. They're getting 11 from their center, who averages 7.5 per game. They're getting 12 on 4 made threes from one of their backup wings. Edgecombe was scoring when he was in. Rob Wright was scoring when he was in. The only guy for Baylor who wasn't really scoring, it was Jaden Nunn, who had 2 points on 1 of 8 shooting. So, I'm trying to remember who. I mean, Kansas switches their guards. I guess at times it was DeWan, at times it was Zeke Mayo, at times it was Shaquille Moore, at times it was different guys. So, I guess just whoever was guarding Jaden Nunn at the time was the defensive MVP for KU. But all around, that was a rough one for KU. And again, it just feels like they have not figured anything out that's going to help them in the long term, in addition to the loss. All right, let's finish up. What is next for KU? Doesn't get much easier. Thanks for joining us on the show. Again, we'll have a KU preview for the next game, which is upcoming. Quick turnaround, Monday night game for the Jayhawks back at home in Allen Fieldhouse. And, I wondered how they would respond after the Houston game. We saw a lethargic effort, but they found a way to win against UCF, which was important. But now doing this again, I wonder if they're going to come out really flat against Iowa State. Yeah, you cannot beat Iowa State coming out flat, especially because, guess what? Iowa State, who you're playing on Monday night, they just weirdly lost at home to Kansas State by 19. Now, maybe there's something going on with Iowa State. They've lost back-to-back games, albeit one on the road against what's been a good Arizona team in overtime, even though they did lose by 11. But, they've lost 3 of 5. So, I don't know. Maybe things are starting to unravel a little bit there. But, I have a hard time believing, knowing the way that team plays, that they're not going to come out pissed off. And knowing the way Kansas plays, I don't think they're going to come out pissed off, if that kind of makes sense. And that scares me a little bit. But maybe the Allen Fieldhouse magic can be enough. Now, that said, we've already seen them lose 2 games this year at Allen Fieldhouse, that it hasn't been enough. Not trying to blame, the fans. I'm just saying, this team has been magic proof in a kind of a negative way there. So you're playing Iowa State at home on Monday, which is an opportunity to feel like you were gaining back some momentum, even though I don't think it totally overcomes what has happened these last 2 Saturdays. But then the problem is you're back on the road on a Saturday at Kansas State. And Kansas State, overall this season, sure, has not been a great team. 10-11. They're finding their stride right now, right? They played pretty well at Baylor and at Kansas. And then they had a 13-point win versus West Virginia. They crushed Oklahoma State, and then they just won by 19 at Iowa State. Kansas State might be finding their rhythm to where Kansas has lost the last 2 years in Manhattan, right? I don't chalk up either of these next 2 games as gimmies, which is crazy because in years past, you would chalk the home games up as winning as gimmies, and you would say, oh, going on the road against 10-11 team, maybe they lose one of those every couple seasons, but like they should be good there. And right now, I'm like, I don't know if they're going to win either of them. And if they do lose both, I mean, that's going to be a disastrous conversation to get to. So can you go 2-0 this week? I don't know. The schedule does get a little bit easier after this week versus Colorado, at Utah, at BYU, who's been good, but versus Oklahoma State, at Colorado. If you can win both games, you need to at least win one of the 2 this week. But if you can win both games, you might be able to build up a little bit of momentum. But I still don't know how much is going to change about this team because I just feel like nothing tangibly is going to change, and we'll see what results that leads to this week because it feels like they do need a tangible change with lineups or how they play or whatever, and I just don't feel like it's going to happen. But yeah, you do have an opportunity in front of you. Iowa State on Monday night on Big Monday, and then at Kansas State next Saturday. That'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. We'll see you Monday for KU Iowa State preview right here, anywhere you get your podcast or on our YouTube page with Locked On Jayhawks.